But first, was it an ISIS-inspired attack? What was it exactly? Tonight's agents and officers are investigating an Ohio State University student's potential ties to terrorism. 11 people were injured on campus today. The attacker was shot dead by a campus cop, and another person has died, unfortunately. Fox News correspondent Mike Tobin is gathering more information about this dynamic story, about what exactly happened and why. Mike, what do you know?
Well, Tucker, the attacker has now been identified as 18-year-old Abdul Razaq Ali Artan, a Somali immigrant. While the motive remains a mystery, law enforcement sources tell Fox News they're looking into a recent Facebook post that could very well have come from Artan himself, which makes a declaration against what is described as unfair treatment of Muslims in this particular Facebook post, and that is being looked into as a possible motive. The attack itself happened just before 10 a.m. at the location just behind me here. The attacker's car jumped a curb, slammed into pedestrians, lost control, and got stuck. According to witnesses, as people gathered around the car, some of them asked Artan if he was okay when he suddenly lunged out of the car with a knife and began hacking people with the knife. Now, the attack itself followed an alarm for a chemical leak in a nearby building. That is why 28-year-old officer Alan Haruchko was on the scene so quickly and able to fire the shots, which stopped the attack.
We believe the threat was ended when the officer engaged the suspect. Very fortunate that an OSU PD officer was there and took quick action, and we believe that injuries were minimized as a result of that.
Many students learned about the attack when they received Buckeye alerts on their phones, their smartphones. Many of them thought it was a hoax or a hacking, as they were told to run, hide, or fight due to an active shooter. We now know that the active shooter claim or declaration was inaccurate, generated in the heat of the moment. The attack was very real.
I mean, I knew it before I even got the Buckeye alert because I had been up in the first floor of the building over here when a couple girls and a couple guys came in and they were out of breath, completely panicked, and they had said that they had just seen somebody drive up and basically run over a crowd of people, and somebody jumped out, and I heard there was like a machete or something happen, and he started slashing at people, and there was also a shooter, and I didn't believe it at first. I mean, not something you kind of expect to run and do today.
Now, the attack follows a November 26 release on an ISIS video channel, which encourages attacks, revenge attacks, as it's outlined in the video, and encourages or recommends different weapons, simplest weapons being the knife or the IED, the homemade bomb. The video goes as far as to give tips on selecting the correct knife for an attack. It also follows a publication in an ISIS propaganda magazine encouraging the use of vehicles in attacks to mirror the attack that we saw in Nice. None of this can be linked to the attack here in Ohio, but all of it has to be considered. Most of the injuries came from impact with the car. Some of the people were injured by the knife. Tucker?
Thanks a lot, Mike. What an awful story, but not necessarily a surprising one. During the 2016 campaign, Donald Trump repeatedly warned about attacks just like this one from refugees. Here's part of what he said on the trail. Watch.
As soon as I enter office, I am going to ask the Department of State, which has been brutalized by Hillary Clinton, brutalized, Homeland Security, and the Department of Justice to begin a comprehensive review of these cases in order to develop a list of regions and countries from which immigration must be suspended until proven and effective vetting mechanisms can be put in place. I call it extreme vetting, right? Extreme vetting. I want extreme.
Trump, of course, was mocked as hysterical, as a bigot. He was attacked by everyone from the press to his Republican opponents. But could it be that he might have been onto something when he said that? Joining us now is Tom Squitieri from the Hill newspaper and Mercedes Schlapp, columnist at the Washington Times newspaper. It's great to see you both. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
So this detail jumped out at me because it just was so familiar. So this guy, Artan, who arrived in this country just 2 years ago from Somalia as a refugee, presumably on government aid, many refugees are, presumably having his tuition paid for him, gave an interview to the Lantern, the Ohio State newspaper, in which he complained about the fact there were no Muslim prayer rooms on campus. And then he said this: it's the media, he said. It's the media that put that picture into their heads, so they, the other students, are going to have that picture, and it's going to make them feel uncomfortable. So here's a guy who's been in this country for 2 years on public expense, and already he's manipulating identity politics to his own benefit. That appears, Mercedes, to be the lesson that we're teaching our refugees.
Well, and it's completely unfortunate because what you're starting to see with Donald Trump is that he's pushing forward this idea of the extreme vetting.
Right.
Gets a lot of pushback, but at the same time, we know that our process, the way it works right now with the refugees coming in without them being vetted appropriately, is a problem. I mean, that's in essence not solving the situation that we're seeing. So you have these refugees coming in. Apparently, if he is on some sort of public aid, that there is this entitlement mentality where they're saying, well, if America doesn't apply by my rules, then it doesn't work. And I think that that's a big problem of assimilation. Is there the opportunity for these refugees to accept American values, number one, and number two, assimilate to our society?
Or the mandate to accept American values. Instead, the expectation is that everyone here will adopt to their views. So, Tom, though, I wonder, though, if extreme vetting would have solved this. This kid was young when he got here. You've seen this in a number of cases. People who grew up here somehow, all of a sudden, transform into terrorists who kill people. So maybe vetting isn't fully the answer to this.
It may not be, particularly in this case. He goes to Columbus, Ohio, which is the third largest community of Somalians in the United States, after Minnesota and Washington, D.C. So he can be vetted cleanly and clearly before he comes in. Then once you get into the environment where there's other people who have been radicalized, you find the problem with the vetting is yesterday and today. He gave that interview to the Lantern in August, about the same time as Donald Trump was making that speech. And he also said in the interview how afraid he was to be on campus and that he needed to protect himself.
But see, it just seems to me that most people who come to this country are good and decent people. You always have to start there because it's true. But you also have to look at the examples of Western Europe and Scandinavia and ask yourself, what did they do wrong to wind up with the disasters they're now living through that we cannot repeat? Like, what are the lessons of that? Is there any adult conversation about that?
Well, I think with Donald Trump, you are going to start seeing that adult conversation because there is the reality that exists. We saw it with the Paris attackers where they slipped through, came into Europe, using fake passports. And so there is that sense of the vetting process not being effective enough. And we know, for example, Representative McCall came out and said they've acknowledged the fact that, for example, militants can come through, slip through the refugee process into the nation. And that's why the idea of Donald Trump pushing forward this temporary halt, let's take a step back. Let's see what's the best way to control the migrant situation. Those are the lessons that I think we need to take from Europe and apply here in the United States.
So maybe there is an ideology that ties these together. I wonder why so few in the press are willing to say that, or I don't know if it's the guilt of the successful or what it is, but why not just say what is obvious, which is clearly there's a worldview that sometimes winds up in mass murder like this.
I think that the guilt of the press extends beyond this, and as we all look for new ways to vet, I think the media itself will look at new ways to do its job. Again, going back to Columbus and Minneapolis and here in Washington, D.C., where you have large groups of immigrants, it leads people who don't have any other connections to find the wrong seeds. I think it's very interesting, Tucker, that Governor Kasich, of all people, one of Mr. Trump's biggest critics during the campaign, is now going to be holding the helm on this investigation that will, in fact, as she was saying earlier, perhaps result in new standards of vetting from an investigation. Here's what we found. We found that this guy went to these people. Well, how are we going to
will it be believable, though? I mean, unfortunately, we're out of time, but I mean, Kasich is, you know, the guy who, on his moral high horse, lectured Trump about how un-American he was for saying this in the first place.
That's why I think it will be believable, because if Kasich says this, you can't say he's an anti-Trump person.
Well, unfortunately, a lot of people got hurt today because of those attitudes. Thanks a lot for joining us both, Mercedes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.